My children deliberately forgot about me for 10 straight years. They did not just drift away or become too busy with the frantic pace of modern life. It was a calculated, systemic erasure. I kept calling their numbers, listening to the hollow ringtone until it went to voicemail. I kept sending checks for their birthdays, for their anniversaries, for the grandchildren I only saw in glossy photographs posted online. I kept driving hours through awful weather to visit them, only to be met with excuses or a closed door. Over the course of a decade, I grew profoundly tired. The warmth in my heart calcified into something cold and brittle. And finally, on one freezing night that shattered the last illusion I had left, I decided to stop. I changed my full legal name. I quietly liquidated every single asset in my $18 million estate. And I disappeared without a trace. 3 months later, when my entitled son frantically called my old, disconnected number begging for a financial bailout to save his crumbling life, the man he was desperately looking for was already dead to him. If you are listening to this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me which city you are watching from. Your support helps me share these stories of survival, justice, and dignity. Now let me tell you exactly how a loving father turned into a ghost to haunt the children who discarded him. My name is Garrison Ford. I am 70 years old for 40 grueling, brilliant years. I worked as a lead urban planner and structural architect, helping to design the very skyline of Boston. I built foundations for massive skyscrapers that kissed the clouds. I understood load-bearing walls, stress tests, and structural integrity. I thought, with every fiber of my being, that I had built a strong, unbreakable foundation for my family. But as I sat shivering in the cab of my rusted, failing 1998 Ford pickup truck on Christmas Eve, I realized with sickening clarity that I had built my house on sand. The blizzard outside was absolutely relentless. The snow was coming down in thick, heavy sheets, burying the interstate highway under a suffocating blanket of white. I had been driving for 4 agonizing hours. The heating system in my old truck had been broken since last winter, and the biting cold was seeping through my worn-out wool coat, settling deep into my bones, making the arthritis in my hands flare up with a sharp, stinging pain that made gripping the steering wheel an exercise in torture. But I did not care about the physical cold. In the passenger seat right next to me sat a heavy box wrapped in bright red paper. Inside was a vintage train set, meticulously hand-carved from solid oak. I had spent 3 months carving it, sanding every edge, painting it with non-toxic colors. It was for my grandson, Leo, whom I had not held since he was an infant. I told myself, repeating the lie like a desperate mantra, that this time would be different. It was Christmas Eve after all, the season of forgiveness, the season of family gatherings. Surely, my son Preston would not turn his own father away in a blinding winter storm like this. I slowly turned the heavy steering wheel, navigating my truck onto the private winding road leading up to his massive estate. I knew this road intimately. I paid for it 10 years ago when Preston came to me with grand dreams and empty pockets. I quietly wrote the check for the entire down payment on this $3 million mansion. I remember Preston hugging me tightly that day, looking me in the eye and telling me I was the best father in the entire world. That was the last time my son ever hugged me. I pulled up to the massive, imposing iron gates that guarded the property. Through the swirling, chaotic snow, I could see the grand house in the distance. It was glowing like a warm beacon in the dark winter night. The tall, arched windows were golden squares of light, cutting through the blizzard. Through the glass, I could clearly see the silhouette of a massive, 12-foot Christmas tree dominating the main foyer. It looked so warm, it looked like heaven. I rolled down my window, and the icy, howling wind instantly slapped my face, stealing my breath. I reached out with a trembling, ungloved hand and pressed the silver button on the intercom. My hand was shaking, not just from the freezing temperature, but from a deep, primal fear of rejection that I desperately refused to admit to myself. A voice crackled sharply through the speaker. It was not Preston's voice, it was a stranger. "State your name and business," the voice demanded, sounding bored and authoritative. I cleared my throat, trying to sound dignified. "It is Garrison Ford. I am here to see my son, Preston, and my daughter, Tiffany. It is Christmas Eve. I have gifts for the grandchildren." There was a long, heavy silence. All I could hear was the wind howling relentlessly around the metal chassis of my truck and the faint static of the intercom. I waited, my heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage. Then the voice returned, but the tone was different. It was much harder, colder. "Mr. Ford, I cannot open the gate." I frowned, leaning closer to the speaker. "What do you mean you cannot open the gate?" "It is freezing out here. Just call Preston, tell him his father is here." "I have presents, I have my orders, sir." The security guard's voice was flat, completely devoid of any human emotion. Mr. Preston gave the security team a strict list of names for the holiday party tonight. He explicitly stated that no one outside of that list is to be admitted under any circumstances. I felt a sudden humiliating flush of heat rise up my neck, contrasting sharply with the freezing air. "I am not a guest," I argued, my voice cracking slightly. "I am his father. Check the list again. There must be a mistake. I do not need to check the list." The guard paused, and for a fleeting second, I thought I heard a tiny hint of pity in his voice, which somehow hurt even more than the rejection itself. "You are on the blacklist, Mr. Ford." The word hung in the freezing air like a physical blow. Blacklist, as if I were a dangerous stalker, as if I were a common criminal, trying to break into the house I had literally bought. "Please," I stammered, my remaining pride crumbling into dust. "Just let me drive up to the front door. I will drop off the presents and leave immediately. I won't even come inside. I won't cause a scene. I just want to give this to Leo." The intercom clicked off. I sat there in the freezing cab, waiting. Maybe he was calling Preston. Maybe there was a shred of decency left in my son's heart. Maybe there was hope. A full minute later, the voice came back. This time, all traces of pity were gone. It was purely professional and brutally cold. "Mr. Ford, I just radioed the main house. Mr. Preston says you need to leave right now. He says if you do not clear the driveway in exactly 5 minutes, he will call the local police and have you arrested for trespassing." I gripped the freezing steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned stark white. Trespassing, on the very property I had helped pay for, the property that was held in a trust I had established. "Why?" I whispered to the cold plastic box of the intercom, tears of absolute frustration blurring my vision. "Why is he doing this?" The guard sighed heavily. "Look, sir, I definitely should not be telling you this, but Mr. Preston said he does not want you ruining the aesthetic of his holiday party. He told the catering staff that he said you smell like old people and failure. He said he does not want his high net worth investors seeing his father driving a rusted truck like that up his driveway." The air completely left my lungs. It felt like I had been punched in the stomach. It wasn't just a simple rejection. It was an active, malicious erasure. My son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders at baseball games, the young man I had put through the most expensive Ivy League universities, was utterly ashamed of me. Not because I was a bad man, not because I had abused him, but simply because I was old. Because I didn't fit into his shiny, curated Instagram life. Because I was no longer a useful ATM. I looked past the imposing iron gate. Through the large panoramic bay window of the formal dining room, I could clearly see them. I saw Preston holding a crystal glass of red wine that probably cost more than my entire monthly pension. He was laughing, his head thrown back in arrogant joy. Beside him was my daughter, Mallory. She was wearing a stunning red silk designer dress that glittered beautifully under the massive crystal chandelier. She was frantically typing on her phone, probably posting empty, hypocritical quotes about gratitude and family values to her thousands of shallow followers. They looked so wealthy, so happy, so incredibly complete. And they were doing it all without me. Then my heart stopped. I saw him, little Leo. He was 7 years old now. He was standing near the edge of the large window in his warm flannel pajamas, clutching a stuffed brown teddy bear. He looked out into the absolute darkness of the blizzard. I do not know if he could actually see me. The snow was falling so heavily, and my dark truck was probably just a vague, menacing shadow in the night. But for one magical, heartbreaking moment, I felt our eyes meet. I slowly raised my stiff hand. I wanted to wave. I just wanted to let him know his grandpa was here, that he was loved. But before my hand even reached the window, another figure appeared. A manicured hand grabbed the child's shoulder tightly. It was my daughter-in-law, Vanessa. She looked out through the glass straight at the gate. She did not wave. She did not offer a polite smile. She looked at my truck with a mixture of absolute annoyance and visceral disgust, her face contorting as if I were a stray, diseased dog digging through her expensive trash. She aggressively grabbed the heavy custom velvet curtains and yanked them violently shut. The golden light instantly vanished. The beautiful mansion became a dark, impenetrable fortress. I sat there in the truck for a very long time. The snow was rapidly piling up on the hood, burying the windshield wipers. The old engine of my truck sputtered violently, choked on the cold, and died. The silence that followed was utterly deafening. I slowly turned my head and looked at the red-wrapped box sitting on the passenger seat next to me. I thought about the countless hours I had spent carving that wooden train. I thought about the savings I had purposefully depleted to buy the expensive materials. And then, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic snap. It was profoundly quiet. It was the distinct sound of a heavy, frayed rope finally breaking under far too much weight. My blood ran cold. All the warmth, all the paternal love, all the endless capacity for forgiveness I had harbored for decades simply evaporated into the freezing air. I did not cry. I was too old for tears, and tonight the biting cold had frozen them before they could even fall. I reached down and turned the key to start the engine again. It roared back to life, coughing a thick plume of black exhaust smoke into the pristine, falling white snow. I aggressively shoved the gear shift into reverse. I backed out of the driveway and onto the main road. I did not look back at the mansion as I drove slowly away from the gate, navigating down the long, winding, treacherous road back toward the empty highway. I made a silent, ironclad promise to the darkness. They wanted me gone. They wanted me to be completely invisible. They genuinely thought I was just a senile, useless old man who smelled of the past and had no future. Fine, I would give them exactly what they wanted, but I would do it on my own terms. I reached into the cluttered glove compartment and pulled out my cell phone. It was an old, outdated model, but it still worked perfectly. I pulled up my contacts and dialed a private number I had not called outside of business hours in over 20 years. It rang once, twice. Hello? A voice answered, sounding groggy, confused, and annoyed. Garrison, is that you? It is midnight. Hello, Hartman, I said. My voice was perfectly steady, far steadier and stronger than it had been in years. The tremble was gone. Garrison, what is wrong? Are you okay? I need you to prepare the paperwork, Hartman. What paperwork? Hartman asked, the sleep slowly leaving his voice. All of it, I said, my tone absolute and unyielding. Selling the house, liquidating the entire portfolio, emptying the offshore accounts, and Hartman, I need the official forms for a complete legal name change. There was a long, stunned pause on the other end of the line. Garrison, are you out of your mind? Are you sure? You are 70 years old. You are talking about completely erasing your entire legal identity. You are talking about scorching the earth. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The golden lights of my entitled son's mansion were nothing but a faint, pathetic glow fading in the massive storm. I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life, I said, my voice as hard as diamond. Garrison Ford died tonight in the snow outside that gate. Monday morning, we start the funeral preparations. The grueling drive from Preston's luxurious estate to my current residence took 40 minutes, but it truly felt like traveling between two completely different planets. I left a sterile world of perfectly manicured lawns, heated stone driveways, and absolute privilege, and slowly entered a decaying neighborhood where the streetlights constantly flickered, and the massive potholes could swallow a truck tire whole. I pulled my Ford into the dark, cramped parking lot of a depressing brick apartment complex on the neglected south side of the city. The entire building constantly smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke. The only elevator had been broken since Thanksgiving, bearing an out-of-order sign that no one ever came to fix, so I had to take the concrete stairs to the 4th floor. My arthritic knees loudly popped and ground with every single agonizing step, a painful, constant reminder of my age and the freezing temperature of the night. I unlocked the deadbolt to apartment 4B and pushed the door open. It was a miserable, cramped studio apartment. The cheap beige carpet was worn thin and heavily stained from a decade of previous tenants. The furniture consisted of cheap, wobbly particle board pieces that I had assessed off with a generic Allen wrench. This was my life for the past 2 years, or at least, This was the life I purposefully allowed my children to see. They genuinely believed I was utterly destitute. They believed that when I finally retired from my firm, I had made a series of incredibly foolish, reckless investments that had completely wiped out my life savings. I intentionally told them I was barely surviving, living solely on a meager Social Security check and food stamps. It was a lie, a necessary, calculated lie. I wanted to know, deep down, if they would still set a place for me at their holiday table if I had absolutely nothing left to offer them but my company and my love. Tonight, at the frozen gate, I got my definitive answer. I slowly took off my heavy, snow-covered coat and hung it on a rusty nail hammered into the wall by the door. The apartment was freezing. The old cast-iron radiator in the corner hissed and clanked loudly, but produced very little actual heat. I walked over to the small, stained kitchenette. My grand Christmas dinner sat waiting for me on the formica counter. It was a cheap, styrofoam cup of instant ramen noodles, beef flavor. I mechanically boiled some tap water in a dented kettle and poured it into the cup. I stood there, leaning against the counter, watching the steam rise and curl in the freezing air like a ghost. I slowly stirred the hard noodles with a flimsy plastic fork. This was the miserable reality my children thought I truly deserved. They knew exactly where I lived. I had given them the address, but they had never visited, not even once. They occasionally sent generic text messages on my birthday with vague, empty promises of catching up soon, but they never came. They were far too terrified that the ugly smell of poverty might somehow cling to their expensive designer clothes. I carried the cup of noodles and sat down at the small, wobbly dining table. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the cracked surface. I had one more call to make tonight. I knew it was incredibly foolish. I knew it was masochistic. But a father's hope is a stubborn, resilient thing. It does not die easily or quietly. It has to be ruthlessly murdered. I dialed Mallory's number. Mallory was my youngest child, my little princess. When she was a teenager, she used to sit cross-legged on the floor of my home office and tell me all about her wild dreams of becoming a famous fashion designer. I had enthusiastically paid for her prestigious design school in Paris. I had funded her first expensive studio in New York City. I had bankrolled the lavish runway shows that almost no one attended. I supported her every whim, every failure, because I believed in her potential. Now she was 35 years old, living in a luxury condo in Miami, and calling herself a lifestyle influencer. The phone rang for a very long time. I was just about to hang up, accepting defeat, when the line suddenly connected. The sound that violently blasted through the small speaker was deafening. It was the heavy, rhythmic thumping bass of aggressive electronic dance music. I could hear people screaming, laughing, and the sharp clinking of expensive crystal glasses. "Mallory," I said, my voice hoarse and quiet against the noise. "It is, Dad." I heard a very loud, dramatic groan on the other end of the line. "Hold on," she shouted, not at me, but at someone standing near her. Then the overwhelming background noise muffled slightly, as if she had angrily stomped into a bathroom or a quiet VIP hallway. "Dad, are you seriously calling me right now?" she hissed, her voice dripping with pure venom. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "It is Christmas Eve, Mallory," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas. I tried to see your brother earlier, but he would not let me in." There was a brief pause, followed by a cruel, dismissive scoff. "Well, can you really blame him, Dad? Preston is trying to build a high-end brand. He cannot have you showing up, looking like a homeless hobo in front of his investors. It is incredibly embarrassing for all of us." The words cut deep, slicing right through my chest, but I maintained my composure. "I just wanted to hear your voice, honey. How are you doing?" "I am busy, Dad," she snapped aggressively. "I am at a very exclusive club right now. There is a table of incredibly wealthy venture capitalists from Silicon Valley sitting right over there. I am currently trying to get the attention of a man who just sold his tech startup for $50 million. I am hunting, Dad. I need to secure my own future, since you stupidly decided to blow our entire inheritance on whatever senile, bad decisions you made." I slowly closed my eyes. The final nail in the coffin had just been hammered in, so that was exactly what I was to them. I was not a father. I was a failed investment vehicle, a disappointing stock that had crashed. "Mallory," I said softly, the last ounce of warmth leaving my body. "I just wanted to know if you were happy, happy?" She laughed, a bitter, sharp, utterly hollow sound. "I will be happy when I finally find a husband who can actually pay my enormous bills." "Look, you are totally throwing off my vibe right now. I need to go back out there before some other desperate girl gets his attention. Do not call me again tonight, you are bad luck." The line went completely dead. I sat there in the absolute silence of my freezing, miserable apartment. The thin steam from my instant noodles had completely stopped rising. The soup was ice cold. I took a single bite, but the cheap broth tasted exactly like ash in my mouth. I pushed the styrofoam bowl away in disgust. I stood up slowly and walked purposefully into the small bedroom closet. I violently pushed aside the few cheap thrift store shirts hanging on the rack and knelt down on the hard floor. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small flathead screwdriver, and pried up a loose, cleverly disguised wooden floorboard in the darkest corner. Underneath the floorboard, nestled securely in the dust, was a heavy, state-of-the-art biometric steel safe. It was literally the only expensive object in this entire miserable apartment. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The heavy steel door clicked open smoothly. Inside there was no dust. Inside there was the absolute truth. I reached in and pulled out a thick, heavy, leather-bound financial ledger. I carried it back to the wobbly kitchen table and opened it directly under the harsh, unforgiving light of the single exposed bulb hanging from the ceiling. The crisp pages were completely filled with numbers, incredibly detailed records of my vast, hidden assets. The $18 million in highly diversified blue-chip stocks. The massive commercial real estate land deeds in Montana. The gold bullion safely stored in a high-security vault in Zurich. My entitled, ungrateful children thought I was a pathetic pauper. They did not know that I was actually one of the silent whales of the financial market. I flipped past the main accounts directly to the section clearly marked Mallory. My index finger slowly traced the long, depressing columns of figures. Date, January 10th. Credit card payoff, $15. Date, March 4th. Luxury car lease settlement, $8, July 2nd. Bailout for failed boutique business venture, $50,000. For the last 3 long years I had been anonymously, quietly paying off her massive, reckless debts. Every single time she completely maxed out her platinum cards buying Chanel bags or taking spontaneous luxury trips to Dubai, I was the unseen phantom who cleared the balance. She genuinely thought she was just incredibly lucky. She thought the bank had made a continuous clerical error, or that she had a mysterious, wealthy secret admirer watching over her. She used to constantly brag on her social media accounts about how the universe always provided for her lavish lifestyle. The universe was me. I had secretly spent over $450,000 trying to keep her financially afloat, desperately hoping that one day she would finally learn basic responsibility. Hoping that if I just cleared the difficult path for her, she would eventually turn around and walk toward me with gratitude. But she didn't walk toward me. She completely walked over me. I looked at the burner phone sitting silently on the table. I vividly remembered her arrogant voice, explicitly telling me I was bad luck. I remembered her proudly declaring she just needed a wealthy man to pay her bills. I reached across the table and picked up a thick red permanent marker. I looked down at the header of the pristine page that clearly read, Mallory Ford, beneficiary. My hand did not shake. I felt a very strange, overwhelming sense of calm wash over me. It was a cold, absolute clarity that I had not felt in years. I uncapped the marker and drew a thick, aggressive red line straight through her printed name. I pressed down so incredibly hard that the felt tip of the marker flattened against the paper. I violently crossed it out again, and again, and again, until her name was absolutely nothing but a dark, unreadable red smear. Right next to the ruined name, I wrote a final note in my neat, precise architectural handwriting. Account closed, paid in full. I slammed the leather ledger shut. The sharp sound of the heavy book snapping closed echoed loudly in the empty room like a gunshot. I was completely done being their safety net. I was done being their ATM. I was done being their doormat. I walked over to the frosty window and looked out at the snowy, desolate street below. A police siren wailed mournfully in the distance. Tomorrow morning, I would wake up early. I would call my lawyer, Hartman, and I would officially begin the incredibly complex legal process of dying. Garrison Ford, the poor, pathetic, unloved old man, was about to permanently disappear. And Alexander Thorne was about to be born. I took one last look at the cold styrofoam bowl of noodles on the table. I picked up the bowl and tossed it directly into the trash can. I was very hungry, but not for food. I was starving for justice. The very next morning, I didn't just quietly disappear. I executed a meticulously crafted exit strategy that I had slowly conceptualized over the last 5 bitter years. I legally changed my name to Alexander Thorne. I chose Thorne because that was exactly what I was going to be in their side. A massive, painful, immovable thorn. With my new driver's license, social security number, and an impeccably forged trail of completely clean new financial documents, I systematically began liquidating the $18 million estate. I sold the commercial properties in Montana to a private equity firm for cash. I transferred the massive Zurich gold reserves into an anonymous offshore corporate entity in the Cayman Islands, completely shielding it from any potential American legal probate courts. I systematically drained every single hidden account, moving the massive funds through a labyrinth of shell companies until the money was virtually untraceable to anyone looking for Garrison Ford. And then, I faked my own total mental and physical decline. I checked myself into a very rundown, depressing state-run hospital on the absolute worst side of the city. I purposefully wore unwashed, heavily soiled clothes. I stopped shaving. I stopped eating properly for 3 days before admission so I would look gaunt, pale, and deeply sick. I paid a discreet, slightly corrupt private physician $5,000 in cash to officially sign off on a highly exaggerated diagnosis of severe, rapid-onset dementia and terminal heart failure. The hospital staff, overworked and deeply underpaid, barely looked twice at me. I was just another abandoned old man taking up a valuable bed in a decaying ward that smelled intensely of bleach and human misery. On the 3rd day in the hospital, I used the ward's public payphone to call Preston's massive house one last time. This time I did not call his personal cell phone. I called the main landline, knowing his entitled wife, Vanessa, would most likely answer. "Hello?" Vanessa's sharp, impatient voice echoed through the receiver. "Vanessa," I croaked, purposefully making my voice sound incredibly weak, frail, and terrified. "It's Garrison. I am in the hospital, Vanessa, the city hospital on 4th Street. The doctors say, they say my heart is failing. They say I need to be moved to a permanent hospice facility, but my Medicare won't cover the transport. Please, can you tell Preston to come get me? I just need a place to stay. Just for a few weeks until I let my voice trail off into a pathetic, wet cough." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could literally hear the gears turning in her greedy, calculating head. She wasn't feeling sympathy. She was rapidly calculating the financial and social cost of bringing a dying, allegedly broke old man into her pristine, expensive mansion. "Garrison," Vanessa finally said, her voice dripping with artificial, sugary sympathy that was completely hollow. "Oh my God, that is so terrible. But you know, Preston is incredibly stressed right now with the new startup launch. The investors are breathing down his neck, and our house, it's just not equipped for medical care. We don't have the staff. It would be incredibly disruptive for little Leo to see you like that. You understand, right? It's for the child. I have nowhere else to go, Vanessa," I begged, leaning heavily into the pathetic act. "I have no money left, please. I am your family." "Look, Garrison," she sighed, the fake sympathy instantly evaporating, replaced by her usual cold annoyance. "I will tell Preston you called, but honestly, the state hospital is probably the absolute best place for you right now. They have professionals there. We will try to send some flowers if we find the time. Good luck, Garrison." She aggressively hung up the phone. The loud click echoed in my ear. I slowly lowered the receiver. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt a massive, powerful surge of adrenaline. The trap was set, and the rats had completely ignored the warning signs. I walked back to my miserable hospital bed and waited for the midnight shift change. When the exhausted nurses were all congregated in the break room drinking stale coffee, I simply walked out the back delivery doors into the cold night air. I threw the cheap hospital gown into a nearby dumpster, put on a brand new, tailored Italian wool coat I had stashed in a rented locker, and hailed a private black car to take me to the airport. By sunrise, Garrison Ford was officially listed as a missing person, presumed dead by exposure or mental wandering. And Alexander Thorne was comfortably sitting in first class on a direct flight to Charleston, South Carolina, sipping expensive black coffee and looking at the sunrise over the clouds. For 3 incredible months, I completely vanished. I bought a beautiful, historic waterfront home in Charleston under my new corporate entity. I bought a small, sturdy fishing boat. I spent my mornings on the calm water, breathing in the salty air, feeling the warm sun slowly thaw the deep 10-year chill in my bones. I didn't check the news in Boston. I didn't look at my children's public social media accounts. I let them live in their hollow, fake world, fully believing that they were finally free of their useless, embarrassing father. But the beautiful thing about building skyscrapers is that you know exactly how to carefully pull the right structural supports to make the entire massive building collapse into dust. It started quietly on a Tuesday morning in April. Preston was incredibly proud of his lifestyle. He lived far beyond his means, financing his $3 million mansion, his 2 leased sports cars, and his wife's endless cosmetic surgeries through a highly complex, precarious web of massive business loans and personal lines of credit. He genuinely believed he was a financial genius. He didn't know that the primary collateral holding his entire house of cards together was the massive trust fund I had quietly established in his name 15 years ago. A trust fund that I had legally, irreversibly liquidated and completely emptied 2 days before I disappeared. Preston was sitting in his glass-walled corner office at his failing tech startup when his private banking manager frantically called him. "Preston, we have a massive critical situation," the banker said, his voice completely devoid of the usual obsequious ass-kissing. "Our internal auditors just flagged your main portfolio." Preston leaned back in his expensive ergonomic leather chair, aggressively spinning a gold pen. "Relax, David. If this is about the late payment on the yacht lease, I am transferring funds from the main trust on Friday." "That's exactly the problem, Preston," the banker said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "There is no trust. The account is completely empty." Preston stopped spinning the pen. His heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "That trust holds over $4 million in blue-chip equities. My father set it up. It is ironclad, Preston. I am looking at the screen right now, the primary beneficiary. Garrison Ford legally exercised a hidden revocation clause 3 months ago. He liquidated the entire $4 million. He transferred it to an offshore holding company and completely closed the domestic account. The money is gone, evaporated." Preston violently stood up, knocking his heavy chair backward. "That is impossible. My father is a senile old idiot who probably died in a ditch 3 months ago. He doesn't even know how to use a smartphone, let alone execute an offshore wire transfer. This is a banking error. Fix it immediately." "It gets worse, Preston," the banker continued, sounding physically sick. "Because that massive trust was the primary collateral for your $3 million mortgage on the estate. The bank is officially triggering the default clause. The mansion is severely underwater. If you cannot provide $2 million in liquid cash collateral by this Friday at 5 p.m., we are initiating immediate aggressive foreclosure proceedings." Preston's face turned completely chalk white. The color rapidly drained from his arrogant features. The massive, invisible walls of his fake, curated life were violently caving in. "You can't do this!" Preston screamed into the phone, losing all his carefully crafted professional composure. "I will sue you. I will ruin this bank." "Preston, please listen to me," the banker said coldly. "Your credit cards are already being frozen as we speak. Your company's primary line of credit is officially suspended pending a full forensic audit. You are completely broke. I highly suggest you hire a very good bankruptcy attorney." The line went dead. Preston stood alone in his massive glass office, staring blankly at the busy city below, finally feeling the icy, terrifying grip of true poverty wrapping around his throat. While Preston was spiraling into absolute financial panic, my daughter Mallory was experiencing her own spectacular, humiliating downfall. She had finally managed to attract the wealthy Silicon Valley investor she had been hunting on Christmas Eve. She had convinced him to move her into his massive penthouse in Manhattan. She was living the absolute dream, spending his money recklessly, posting hundreds of pictures of her new luxury lifestyle to her thousands of followers. But Mallory was incredibly arrogant. She thought her new boyfriend was just a stupid ATM, exactly how she viewed me. She didn't realize that wealthy men who built their own tech empires were rarely stupid. The investor, a sharp, deeply analytical man named Julian, had quickly noticed massive discrepancies in Mallory's stories. He noticed how she constantly demanded expensive gifts, but never actually paid for her own basic living expenses. He quietly hired a very expensive, discreet private investigator to look into her background, assuming she might be hiding some massive secret debt. The private investigator didn't find debt. He found something much worse. He found the absolute truth. Julian invited Mallory to a very public, incredibly expensive dinner at a 5-star Michelin restaurant in Manhattan. Mallory wore a $10,000 designer dress she had aggressively charged to Julian's black card. She sat across the candlelit table, drinking expensive champagne, fully expecting a massive diamond engagement ring. Instead, Julian calmly placed a thick manila folder on the white tablecloth. "What is this, babe?" Mallory asked, offering a fake confused pout. "Is this the deed to the summer house in the Hamptons?" "No," Julian said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any warmth. "It is a complete, detailed background check. It details exactly how you completely bankrupted your own father to fund your fake influencer lifestyle. It details how you let him live in a freezing, rotting apartment while you bought Chanel bags. And it details how, when he called you on Christmas Eve begging for help, you told him he was bad luck and hung up." Mallory's jaw dropped. The champagne glass trembled violently in her hand. "Julian, where did you get this? This is all completely fake. My father was crazy. He made bad investments. I tried to help him." Julian coldly raised a hand to silence her. "I spoke to your father's former lawyer, Hartman. He legally confirmed that Garrison Ford secretly paid off nearly $500,000 of your personal debt over the last 3 years. He literally kept you out of prison for credit fraud. And you threw him away like actual garbage." Julian stood up from the table. The entire busy restaurant was slowly turning to watch them. "I am canceling the black card," Julian said loudly, making sure the nearby tables of wealthy elites could hear every single word. "I have already instructed my building security to pack your cheap clothes into garbage bags and leave them in the lobby. You have exactly 1 hour to collect them before they throw them in the dumpster. Do not ever contact me again. You disgust me." Julian dropped a $100 bill on the table for his drink and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Mallory sitting completely alone, staring at the terrifying reality of her shattered life. She didn't have a wealthy husband. She didn't have her father's secret safety net. She had absolutely nothing. The financial bleeding didn't stop there. I wasn't just targeting their bank accounts. I was aggressively targeting their entitled pride. Tiffany, my eldest daughter, thought she was completely safe. She lived in a very nice upper-middle-class suburb in Connecticut with her husband, Mark. They had always acted incredibly superior to Preston and Mallory, constantly lecturing them about financial responsibility. But Tiffany's entire comfortable suburban life was a massive lie built on my stolen money. 10 years ago, when they bought their beautiful 5-bedroom colonial house on Elm Street, I had quietly co-signed the massive mortgage because Mark's credit was absolute garbage. I also secretly paid the property taxes every single year, allowing them to live far above their actual income. They never thanked me, they just expected it. They treated me like a silent utility company, only noticing me when they wanted the power turned on. I didn't just stop paying the property taxes, I actively initiated a massive, aggressive legal maneuver. Through my new corporate entity, Alexander Holdings, I quietly bought the underlying debt of their mortgage from the bank at a premium. Then, I meticulously combed through the original mortgage contract they had signed a decade ago. I found exactly what I was looking for, a strict ironclad acceleration clause. If the co-signer formally withdrew financial backing, or if the primary borrowers missed a single property tax payment, the entire remaining balance of the massive mortgage became immediately due in full within 30 days. I legally withdrew my financial backing. The bank immediately triggered the acceleration clause. Tiffany and Mark received the certified legal notice on a Wednesday afternoon, while they were hosting a very pretentious neighborhood barbecue. The letter was incredibly brutal. It clearly stated that they owed $1.2 million immediately, or the house would be violently seized and auctioned within 45 days. Tiffany immediately tried to call me. She called my old cell phone number 50 times in 1 hour, leaving frantic, screaming voicemails, demanding that I fix the stupid clerical error. But the number was completely disconnected. Garrison Ford was a ghost. Desperate, Tiffany called Preston, hoping her wealthy, successful brother could easily loan them the money to save their perfect suburban life. "Preston!" Tiffany cried into the phone, standing in her expensive kitchen while her neighbors ate hot dogs outside. "Dad messed up the mortgage. The bank is demanding $1 million. You have to help us. Write us a check right now." Preston, sitting in his dark, empty glass office, completely ruined and facing total bankruptcy himself, let out a massive, unhinged laugh that sounded genuinely crazy. "Write you a check?" Preston screamed hysterically. "Tiffany, I don't even have the money to buy a cup of coffee. The bank is taking the mansion. The trust fund is completely gone. Dad took everything and vanished. We are all ruined. Do you hear me?" "Ruined." Tiffany dropped her expensive smartphone onto the hard marble floor. The screen violently shattered into 100 jagged pieces, perfectly mirroring her completely destroyed life. For 30 long, agonizing days, my children lived in absolute, terrified chaos. Preston was aggressively evicted from his $3 million mansion. His entitled wife, Vanessa, realizing the money was completely gone, filed for immediate divorce and took full custody of Leo, moving back in with her wealthy parents in California and forbidding Preston from seeing his own son until he paid massive child support he absolutely could not afford. Preston was forced to move into a cheap, disgusting motel on the very edge of the city, sleeping on a stained mattress and eating cheap instant ramen noodles, exactly like the ones I had eaten on Christmas Eve. Mallory, completely cut off from her wealthy investor and deeply drowning in massive credit card debt, was aggressively hunted down by debt collectors. Her luxury condo was seized. Her expensive cars were repossessed in the middle of the night. Desperate for any income, she was finally forced to take a grueling minimum-wage job as a barista at a busy coffee shop, wearing a stained apron and taking angry orders from the exact same type of arrogant, wealthy people she used to pretend to be. Tiffany and Mark lost the beautiful house on Elm Street. The bank auctioned it off for pennies on the dollar. They had to move into a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Mark, completely unable to handle the massive stress and the humiliating loss of status, started drinking heavily. Their perfect suburban marriage rapidly dissolved into endless, screaming fights about money. They were completely broken. The arrogant, entitled parasites who had confidently believed they were untouchable royalty had been violently reduced to absolute peasants. And they still didn't know the absolute truth. They still thought Garrison Ford was a senile old fool who had accidentally ruined them through massive incompetence before dying in the cold. It was finally time to properly educate them. I called my loyal lawyer Hartman. "It is time." "Hartman," I said calmly, looking out over the beautiful blue water of Charleston Harbor. "Execute the final protocol. Bring them all to the reading of the will." The summons arrived at their respective miserable addresses via aggressive, certified couriers. The letters explicitly stated that Garrison Ford had officially been declared legally dead, and they were mandatorily required to attend the final reading of his last will and testament at the prestigious downtown law offices of Hartman and Associates. They all showed up, of course they did. Like starving vultures smelling a potential carcass, they desperately hoped that maybe, just maybe, the old man had hidden a few $1,000s in a secret life insurance policy. I watched the entire pathetic scene unfold on a massive, high-definition monitor in a secure, hidden room directly adjacent to Hartman's main conference room. Preston walked in first. He looked completely terrible. He hadn't shaved in days. His expensive suit was wrinkled and smelled faintly of cheap motel soap. He looked 10 years older, completely broken by the relentless stress of bankruptcy and divorce. Mallory arrived next. She looked incredibly exhausted, carrying a cheap, frayed canvas bag instead of a Chanel purse. She aggressively avoided looking at Preston, silently blaming him for not saving the family fortune. Tiffany and Mark dragged themselves in last, looking completely miserable and openly hostile toward each other. They all sat down at the heavy mahogany table. The room was absolutely silent. Hartman walked in, carrying a thick, black leather folder. He didn't offer any fake condolences. He didn't offer them coffee. He just sat at the head of the table and looked at them with cold, professional disdain. "Thank you all for coming," Hartman said flatly. "We are here to formally read the final directive regarding the estate of Garrison Ford." Preston leaned forward aggressively, his bloodshot eyes wide with desperate hope. "Just tell us the number, Hartman. Did he have any hidden accounts? A life insurance policy? Is there anything left?" Hartman slowly opened the black folder. He pulled out a single crisp piece of white paper. It wasn't a long, complex legal document. It was just one page. Garrison Ford left very specific instructions, Hartman said, adjusting his glasses. "I will read them exactly as he wrote them." Hartman cleared his throat. "To my eldest son, Preston, you always prioritized the aesthetic of your life over the actual substance. You valued your fake investors over your own blood. You told the security guard that I smelled like old people and failure. I have officially ensured that you now intimately know what true failure feels like. The trust fund is permanently gone. You get absolutely nothing." Preston physically recoiled, as if Hartman had violently slapped him across the face. "He knew?" Preston whispered in absolute horror, his face turning completely pale. "He heard me?" Hartman completely ignored him and continued reading. "To my youngest daughter, Mallory, for 3 long years, I anonymously paid off nearly $500,000 of your massive, reckless credit card debt. You thought the universe was magically providing for you. The universe was me. On Christmas Eve, you explicitly told me I was bad luck and hung up on me to chase a wealthy man. The universe has officially closed its account. You get absolutely nothing." Mallory buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, pathetic sob that echoed loudly in the silent room. "To my daughter, Tiffany, you treated me like a silent utility company, completely ignoring my existence until you needed the bills paid. The massive mortgage on the Elm Street house was entirely funded by my silent charity. I legally withdrew that charity. You get absolutely nothing." Tiffany openly glared at Mark, her face twisting in pure rage, but she couldn't say a single word. "They were all completely guilty." Hartman put the paper down. "That concludes the final reading of the will." Preston stood up violently, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "This is completely insane. He can't just evaporate $18 million. Where is the money, Hartman? Who did he give it to? A charity? A dog shelter? I am his eldest son. I demand a full legal forensic audit of the entire estate." "That will not be necessary, Preston." A calm, deep voice echoed through the room. The heavy oak doors at the back of the conference room slowly swung open. I walked into the room. I was not wearing a cheap, worn-out wool coat. I was wearing a meticulously tailored, $5,000 Italian suit. I was freshly shaved. I looked healthy, strong, and incredibly powerful. I did not look like a senile, freezing old man begging for scraps at a gate. I looked exactly like the ruthless, brilliant architect who had built the Boston skyline. The reaction was absolutely priceless. It was the greatest, most incredibly satisfying moment of my entire life. Preston physically staggered backward, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked like he had literally seen a terrifying ghost. Mallory stopped crying, her eyes bulging in absolute shock. Tiffany let out a short, terrified scream. "Dad?" Preston choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whisper. You're alive. The hospital said, the police said, the hospital diagnosed a man named Garrison Ford," I said coldly, walking slowly to the head of the table. "Garrison Ford died on Christmas Eve. My legal name is Alexander Thorne, and I have never been healthier in my entire life." I stood there, looking down at the broken, miserable people who used to be my children. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. They had ruthlessly extracted every last drop of love from my heart, leaving only cold, hard justice. "You did this?" Preston screamed, his initial shock rapidly turning into desperate, unhinged rage. "You actively planned this? You purposefully destroyed my entire life? You ruined my marriage. You took my son away from me." "I didn't destroy your life, Preston," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. "Your massive arrogance and your incredible financial stupidity destroyed your life. I simply stopped paying for the expensive glue that held your fake life together. The house of cards fell exactly as it was mathematically destined to fall. You hid $18 million, Mallory screamed, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. That is our money. You have to give it to us. We are completely starving, Dad. I am working in a coffee shop. It is not your money, I corrected her sharply. It is my money. I earned every single penny of it, building skyscrapers, while you were busy trying to become famous on the internet. And frankly, Mallory, honest work might finally build some actual character in you. This is completely illegal. Preston yelled, slamming his hand violently on the table. You faked your own death. You committed massive financial fraud. I am calling the police right now. I will have you arrested. Hartman finally spoke up, a cold, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Actually, Preston, Mr. Thorne committed absolutely no crimes. He simply changed his legal name through the proper federal channels. He legally liquidated his own assets. The hospital misdiagnosed him, a tragic medical error, but not a crime. You assumed he was dead because you completely abandoned him. The police assumed he was missing. Mr. Thorne just took an extended, very private vacation to South Carolina. Everything was executed with absolute ironclad legality. I looked Preston directly in his desperate, bloodshot eyes. You legally threw me away, Preston. You literally told the security guard that you didn't want me ruining your aesthetic. Well, consider my presence officially removed from your life. The money is gone. The safety net is gone. You are completely on your own, please. Tiffany begged, tears finally streaming down her face, completely shattering her usual arrogant facade. Dad, we are so incredibly sorry. We didn't know you were suffering. Mark is drinking constantly. We live in a tiny apartment, please. Just pay off the mortgage debt. We can be a real family again. We can spend Christmas together. Christmas together. I repeated, my voice dripping with absolute venom. You want to spend Christmas with a man who smells like old people and failure? No, Tiffany. You don't want a father, you just want a completely free ride, and the ride is officially over. Forever. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the heavy oak doors. You can't just leave us like this. Preston screamed, his voice breaking in total despair. I am your son, Leo is your grandson. Do you really want him growing up in absolute poverty? I stopped. I didn't turn around. I created a completely secure, ironclad educational trust strictly for Leo, I said softly, looking at the dark wood of the door. It will perfectly cover his college tuition and provide him a modest living stipend. But he cannot access a single penny of it until he is 25 years old, and the trustee is a very strict independent fiduciary. You and Vanessa will never touch a single dime of that money. I took a deep breath, feeling the final, heavy weight of the last 10 years completely lift off my shoulders. Goodbye, Preston. Goodbye, Mallory. Goodbye, Tiffany. Do not ever try to contact me again. Garrison Ford is dead. I walked out the door and let it heavily click shut behind me. I returned to my beautiful, quiet life in Charleston. I didn't buy a massive yacht or a private jet. I bought a small, sturdy fishing boat. I wake up every single morning before the sun rises, and I go out on the calm water. The salty air is clean and perfectly fresh. My arthritis feels much better in the warm southern heat. I used a large portion of the recovered funds to establish a massive, completely anonymous scholarship foundation for underprivileged children who actually want to work hard and build a real future for themselves. I volunteer 3 days a week at a local community center, quietly mentoring young boys who don't have strong fathers in their lives. Last week, one of the boys, a brilliant, quiet kid named Marcus, drew a beautiful picture for me. It was a crude, colorful crayon drawing of a man standing on a small fishing boat, reeling in a massive fish. He handed it to me shyly, looking down at his worn-out sneakers. Thank you, Grandpa Alex, he mumbled quietly. I took the drawing. I looked at the bright colors, feeling a completely unexpected, massive lump rise in my throat. I hadn't cried on that freezing Christmas Eve in Boston. I hadn't cried when I legally erased my entire life. But looking at that simple, beautiful piece of paper, a single warm tear slowly rolled down my weathered cheek. You're very welcome, Marcus, I said softly, putting a strong, reassuring hand on his young shoulder. I took the drawing home and proudly framed it. It sits on the main mantel in my living room. right next to a small hand-carved vintage wooden train set. I have a completely new name. I have my dignity. I have my absolute freedom. And for the very first time in over a decade, I finally have a real family. A family built entirely on mutual respect, genuine kindness, and actual love, not toxic financial obligation. Sometimes, you have to completely lose the fake life you painstakingly built to find the absolute peace you actually deserve. My days are quiet now, but they are incredibly full. I walk the historic cobblestone streets of Charleston every single afternoon, listening to the distant ring of old church bells and the gentle crash of the Atlantic Ocean against the stone battery wall. For decades, I was entirely surrounded by the deafening roar of Boston traffic, the relentless, exhausting demands of ungrateful children, and the crushing pressure of a career that never allowed me to simply breathe. Now my biggest concern is whether the tide is right for fishing, or if the local bakery has my favorite peach cobbler fresh out of the warm oven. I've made genuine friends here, real friends, not wealthy, arrogant socialites or greedy tech investors, but retired school teachers, local fishermen, and kind-hearted people who don't care at all about the massive balance hidden in my offshore bank account. We sit on wide, wrap-around wooden porches, drinking cold, sweet tea, and talking about everything and absolutely nothing as the brilliant sun sets over the beautiful water. It's a beautifully simple life, a profoundly ordinary life, but it is entirely, completely mine. I bought it with my own sweat, secured it with my own cunning, and I will fiercely defend it until my dying breath. No entitled parasite will ever take my peace from me again. Garrison Ford is dead, Alexander Thorne is alive, and he has never been happier.